It is the evening of January 24th, 2021, and I'm sitting here bundled up with a watch cap and a wool blanket around me because I don't think this house has ever been this cold. We haven't turned the heat on as of yet this winter. Yes, we do have winter in Phoenix. And I say all of that as a prelude to episode 1 of the memoir recordings. I've always lived in a temperate climate. I grew up in Southern California, Orange County specifically. Lived for a while in South Pasadena, worked in downtown LA, and then moved to Phoenix, another temperate climate. So I didn't grow up like my parents, who shoveled snow and walked through the snow to school uphill both ways. And that's a whole series of recollections that I can share about my parents growing up. But my wife and I are both children of the Depression, the Great Depression of the early 30s. And so there were all kinds of stories associated with that, and it profoundly frames how one grows up, because those memories of her parents and my parents growing up in that time, and then launching into World War II. My dad was in the South Pacific for 4 years. Anne's dad, birth dad, who passed away her senior year in high school, also spent 4 years in the South Pacific, going from island to island with the 1st Marines. And interestingly enough, my dad's ship transported many units of 1st Marines from island to island, number of landings in that regard. Trying to look back, I remember my dad asked me the question, I was probably 20 or so, and he asked me, he said, how far back can you remember? And it seemed like kind of an odd question. I don't have any recollection of living in an apartment shortly after I was born up until the age of 2 in Inglewood, California, on a street called Hyde Park, and at the end of Hyde Park was a park, Hyde Park. I do remember seeing black and white photographs that my parents had taken of me in the park with swans on the pond. Very placid, tranquil park. And over the years, of course, Inglewood has changed dramatically from a socioeconomic standpoint. But my parents lived there shortly after they were married. That's where I was born, at Queen of Angels Hospital. And of course, I don't remember that. But back to my dad's question, when I was 20 or so, how far back do I remember? I think the most vivid memory I have is when we moved to Fullerton in 1954. Simple 3-bedroom, 2-bath track house, carved out of an old orange grove known as the Porter Estates. It was a wonderful place to grow up. There were numerous neighbor kids my age, some a little younger, some older, and we would play all day. I mean, it was, the street was the playground, our backyards were playgrounds, our front yards were playgrounds, our driveways were playgrounds. there weren't any real conflicts. My recall, back to the recall, I do remember standing at the front door as my dad left for work. I think he was driving a 51 or 52 powder blue Ford sedan at the time. And so I remember standing at the front door as my dad backed out the driveway, and it was very foggy. And I was reminded later of what I said, and what I said was, "It's very froggy, very froggy." So I do remember, I do have a mind's eye recollection of that morning, and the fog so thick you could barely see across the street, and watching my dad back out of the driveway and drive to work. He was maybe a couple of miles from the business office of Southern California, Edison, and so that's where he spent probably 45 years of his working life with one employer, essentially doing one job. And I remember asking my dad after I started working, I said, "Dad, how is it that you could do this essentially the same thing every day for 45 years?" And he said, "Well, it's real simple. I had a commitment to support my family, and so I just did it. I didn't even think about, the boredom of it. I just, got up every morning, went to work, and came home for lunch, went back, came home in the evening, and had dinner. And sometimes I'd work overtime, and sometimes I'd work Saturdays, and just didn't really think very much about it." And of course, this is a far cry from what I've had the opportunity to do throughout my career. Essentially, the opportunities to do something creative, virtually, and different every day. Sometimes the design of a logo for a project, or come up with a piece of sculpture, or design a plaza for a project, any number of things. Everything was different, and so it's been over 50 years since I graduated from high school, and I started working in high school. I was self-employed, mowing lawns, and then just kept working from high school and through college. And so I've essentially been working at my profession for the last 50 years, which seems quite remarkable, because it's gone rather quickly. And but it's good to look back, and but thinking about growing up in that wonderful neighborhood in Orange County. Virtually every mom was a stay-at-home mom. Every dad, with rare exception, was either a World War II or a Korean War veteran. The homes were all purchased, for the most part, on a VA loan with nothing down. And the price range, I think, at the time was between $11,000 and $13,000, depending on the size of the lot. There were some large lots. In fact, we backed onto our neighbors, the Riddells and the Curleys. They were in what we know it as a cul-de-sac, but it was called the Circle, and there were two circles. There was the first circle and the second circle. So, those that lived on the circle were either the first circle or the second circle. So in the first circle was, of corner was Tommy Weber, and he was 5 years older than I was, but we still played sports together. So I grew up playing, you know, football and baseball and basketball in the driveway with a lot of the older kids and the boys in the neighborhood. And so Tommy Weber was on the corner. The Riddells, Lenny and Bobby, who was Roberta, were their two daughters. Dick Riddell, oh, and they had Dick Riddell Jr. Dick Riddell Jr. had, I believe he had polio, or maybe it was severe arthritis, I don't know, but he was crippled virtually his entire life. They built a little guest house at the back of their house for him to live in until he passed away. He taught math at Mater Dei High School, and Lenny was about 3 years older than me, and her sister Bobby, Roberta, was probably 6 years older, but they babysat for us, for my parents, and the three of us kids. They were the first people on the block to build a swimming pool in their backyard, and so we were frequently invited to come over and swim in their backyard and swim in their pool. Starting at the age of 12, I started mowing their lawn, taking care of their lawn, along with probably 4 or 5 others. So I mowed 4 or 5 lawns with a push mower and a hand edger on a given Saturday, starting at the age of 12. Next to the Riddells were the Curleys, and they had probably the biggest lot on the circle, the first circle, and they had huge alder trees. And Mr. Curley was he was an engineer, aerospace engineer. Mr. Riddell was actually the original manager, airport manager for Orange County Airport when it was only private and a little bit of commercial aircraft flying in and out of Orange County Airport. He and another pilot actually set the world's record for being aloft for, I don't know what the record was, but it was a good week that they were aloft, and so that was a record. They flew out of Fullerton Airport, and so that was Mr. Riddell, and then forgot Mrs. Riddell's first name. Anyway, but the Curleys lived next door. They had big alder trees. Mr. Curley built a big patio cover, big heavy timbered patio cover off of their backyard, and did some vertical screens out of bamboo and some other things, and then built a huge clubhouse. It was a 2-story clubhouse, and on numerous occasions we would fall out of the second floor. There was a basketball hoop that was attached to it. Neither Tom, who was the oldest, nor Stan, who was my brother's age, were very athletic, but they were highly scientific. I think they both ended up with careers as engineers, just as their dad, and you know, they were the nerds of the day. I use that term affectionately, but they were not the athletic boys that that were dominant in the neighborhood. And then next to them were the Carnivals. Lisa Carnival was Lenny's age, and Randy was a little younger than me. He ended up playing football after they moved out of the area, but he ended up playing football for Stanford, as I recall. Somebody had mentioned that. And then next to them, we thought they were just the strangest people. They didn't have a TV. The two girls played violin and piano. And I believe they were homeschooled. And we just thought they were just, a little bit odd. And amazing things change when God converts you. You don't see them as odd. And then next to those people, a young man who was my sister's age. I forgot who they were. They moved in. Anyway, but across the circle were the Lunnons, and then next to the Lunnons were the Ferrantes. They were a couple, didn't have kids, middle-aged couple. And then next to them, south of them, was Keith and Kenny Henry. And Kenny had essentially one skill. He was another kind of non-athletic person. He had one skill. He had a big wooden barrel in his backyard, and he knew how to barrel walk. He could walk the barrel up and back, almost like a circus performer, and he could walk the barrel up and back. The one advantage of being friends with Keith and Kenny Henry was from their backyard, through a ladder on one side and a ladder on the other, we were able to go over the wall, the block wall, and access the orange grove. There was a remnant orange grove left after they carved out the neighborhood. It's now apartments, but there was a remnant orange grove, and that was kind of the extension of our street and backyard and front yard and driveway playground. In the spring, when the mustard would come up, we would pick the raw, unripe oranges, which were hard as rocks, and we would take large boxes, appliance boxes. People are moving in and out in the neighborhood and buying appliances, so we had access to these large appliance boxes, and we would turn them into tanks, and we'd get inside and we'd propel ourselves like a tank through the mustard and make these trails through the mustard, and we would fire these oranges at others who were doing the same thing, plowing their way through the mustard fields and in and out of the some of the orange trees had died and some of them were still alive, and then there was a portion that used to be a house that fronted Orangethorpe Avenue, and all that was left was a foundation. So that foundation also served as a bunker for our little orange wars in the orange grove. So anyway, there were a whole group of cast and characters. There was Alan and Alton, the twins, who were very tall and gangly. They would come over and play basketball in the driveway. Bryant Wells lived on the other side on Orangethorpe. He would come over and we'd play home run derby in the driveway and play basketball. We were the only ones that had a basketball hoop, and my dad had one of the guys at the Edison company who had access to a welder. He made some steel angled brackets that we bolted to the eave extensions, the rafter tail extensions on the garage. So it was bolted and then went up, and then we had a 3/4 inch plywood backboard, the shape of a backboard, the rounded back and the basketball goal. and this little narrow basketball court that was weathered asphalt. It was very rough asphalt. So, if we got pushed around and fell down on the asphalt, I mean, we were always scraped up. And but we had the best time just shooting baskets. Sometimes at night, we wouldn't stop just because it was night. I still have the lamp. It's a clamp on shop lamp that we would clamp to the gutter, plug in through an extension cord, and we'd have a night light, a light to play and shoot baskets at night. But one of the disadvantages of the asphalt driveway is it would wear down the basketball. So every year seemed we would get a new basketball for Christmas, just because the wear and tear of and we seemed to play constantly. Different people would show up, and I remember my dad at times he'd come home and we'd be out there shooting baskets, particularly in the fall and the winter, and the liquid amber tree was losing its leaves, and that was on the west side of the driveway. And then my dad would come home, and if we were playing, we'd motion for him to park in the street, and so he'd park in the street, and then he had such bad bursitis in his elbow. We'd exhort him to shoot some baskets. I mean, he could barely lift his arm, kind of high enough to to shoot the ball. And but my dad played basketball for Lincoln High School in Webster City, Iowa. Actually played at 6 foot tall, played center in the Iowa State Championships. So very interesting. A teammate of his, both the baseball team and the basketball team, Ralph Clave, became an MD and had a practice in Fullerton, same city. And then there was another gentleman from Webster City that my dad knew. His name was Ron Flasher. And Ron Flasher managed a men's and young men's clothing store called Vandermast's in Anaheim in the Broadway Plaza. And so frequently on Friday nights we would go and visit, my dad would visit Ron, and we may pick up a shirt or a pair of pants, and then we'd go over to the Save on Drugs across from the Broadway and get a 5-cent ice cream cone. It was really a big Friday night for us to do that. But we did that frequently, and we did a lot of things that didn't cost a lot of money, but were very, very enjoyable experiences. And Dad would, talk to Ron about the days in Iowa. But speaking of Iowa, there was also, it seemed like it was an annual or maybe every 2 years, but it was a pretty regular occurrence, was the Iowa, Webster City, Iowa picnic. And it was a gathering of people who lived in Webster City who had relocated to Southern California. And it seemed like it was a huge picnic. It was like this reunion of all these people that grew up together and lived in Webster City, Iowa. My grandpa would be at the picnic. He knew everybody because he ran the gas station in Webster City, which was a town of 4,000 to 5,000 people. And so, he knew everybody. My Uncle Lyle seemed to know a lot of people because during the Depression, he would deliver groceries. My dad would sell newspapers on the corner, no matter what time of year. I mean, the dead of winter, 30 below, he's selling newspapers on the corner during the Depression. But anyway, the Iowa Webster City picnic was always it was a big deal, a huge event. I remember remember this huge park with kind of a rolling landscape, large open lawn areas, big trees, big picnic structures, large picnic structures, and people were, the grills were all integrated. This was back in the day when they really built parks to last. Everything was custom. Most of the parks had small fishing ponds, for sailing boats and fishing and all of those things. But these were quite elaborate parks. I remember in Hillcrest Park in Fullerton, you could had a lot of slope, and so we would take cardboard and we'd slide down the grass slopes, and there was a duck pond there, and then up the way from Hillcrest Park was Laguna Lake, and so my dad would take my brother and I fishing there frequently on Saturday mornings, and we'd catch little perch about this big, and we'd put them in a bucket and we'd bring them home, and we'd bury them as fertilizer around the peach tree. So probably explains the abundant peach harvest and crop every year. I remember on a few occasions Dad would take us to a bigger lake called Irvine, at Irvine Park. Lots of sycamores surrounding the lake, and I remember we'd get up really early, like 4 a.m., and drive there, so at sunrise we were fishing at Irvine Park. So Irvine Park was part of the Irvine Ranch. It's now a community called Irvine, incorporated city called Irvine. But at the time it was essentially open farmland and this big county park. A lot of this kind of came back to mind. The only high school reunion I've been to was the 30th high school reunion, and Ann and I went to the reunion. Ann had a great time and saw some people that I'd known since from the neighborhood, 3 and 4 years old, and so here we are, 30 years after graduating from high school, at this reunion. And I remember several people standing up and talking about what a wonderfully unique place. Now that everybody had dispersed and people are living in different parts of the country, they'd been to college in different parts of the country, and they're living in different parts of the country, and kind of looking around at the American landscape and fondly looking back at growing up in Fullerton when it was a town of 25 to 30,000. What a unique place it was to live, with a very temperate climate, close to the beach, close to the mountains, all of those things. But I remember, we would. I remember somebody had sour grass that grew out of their ivy down at the corner. I think it was the Edwardses, and so we'd pick this sour grass, it had a yellow flower on it, and we'd suck on this grass. I don't know if it was toxic or not, but we'd just suck on this stuff, and it was a natural kind of sweet tart, if you will. So we just kind of this sour grass that we'd, and then I remember the catkins on the birch tree. Mom and Dad planted a cluster of 3 birch trees in the front yard, and so these catkins would dry, and so we'd kind of take a handful of them and throw them in the air, watch the wind blow them away, and just all of these, natural things. It's funny, I guess my first introduction to plants was, my mom knew what plants they bought and what they, what they planted, and I had to correct her once I learned the correct botanical terms, but the Moraya, Murraya, Moraya jasmine was kind of the dominant plant in the front, and then there was a podocarpus, which my mother pronounced portocarpus. It was podocarpus, Podocarpus, podocarpus microphylla. And so we had that. We had a bottle brush, Callistemon citrinus, in the backyard that would attract bees, and that was planted as kind of a foil, kind of a screen, because in the corner of every backyard in that neighborhood was an incinerator, and so I don't even think we had trash pickup. Everyone would just burn their trash in their is a precast concrete kit. It was reinforced concrete with a wire mesh that ran through it, and it was kind of put together, and it had a steel lid. You'd lift the lid up, and you'd light a fire, and then you'd just throw your trash in there and burn it. And there was a little chimney element, and so in the morning you could go out and you'd smell all of this burning trash, everyone in their backyard, and depending on which way the wind blew, so you had those olfactory kind of experiences, and then if they were producing orange juice to the northeast at Highland, south of Commonwealth, there was a big Cal Fame orange juice processing plant, so you could smell that, and then you could also, it was faint, but I remember mowing a lawn when I was in high school. These two elderly women lived by the Hunt's tomato processing plant, and that, after a Friday night of processing, it just really smelled pungent. And so I'd always mow their lawn on a Saturday morning, and they lived over by the Hunt's processing plant, and then it became the Hunt Wesson Complex. They built a library for the city, kind of as a gift, thanking the city for allowing them to, have their headquarters there, and probably some tax breaks, I'm sure. But Hunt's was a big employer there in Fullerton, as was Beckman Instruments, Hughes Aircraft, lots of aerospace, and Nortronics, Autonetics, Kimberly Clark, the toilet paper people. There's just kind of a lot of manufacturing in and around Fullerton. So anyway, back to the temperate climate. I remember Mom and Dad, they had a wall heater, a gas wall heater that really served to heat the whole house. Didn't always get the kitchen warm, so I remember some mornings that were cooler, and I'm kind of back to where I started with the temperate climate thing, but I remember my mom would turn on the oven and open the oven door to kind of heat up the kitchen when we came out to eat breakfast before we went to school, and so it was very interesting. My mom never had a dishwasher. Everything was done in this double porcelain sink in the corner of the kitchen. There was a corner window, you could look out in the backyard, and then there was the service porch. For years, Mom just had the washer, didn't have a dryer, and then the clothesline was in the backyard. And I remember my brother and I would get up really early, 5 a.m. on Saturday mornings, and we'd play Edison Man. And so the poles for the clothesline, were the power poles, and the I think it was probably 10 gauge wire. That was the clothesline. Those were the power lines, and so we'd pretend that we'd climb up and we were working on the power lines, and then we went through all kinds of safety protocols. You know, if somebody got electrocuted, you know, how do you get the line off of the electrocuted body without electrocuting yourself? You know, you take your belt off and you slide it under and you pull the wire off the victim's body, and so anyway, we went through all these little safety scenarios. We attempted to make parachutes out of bed sheets, and we'd jump out of the mulberry tree or the orange tree in the backyard and try to catch some wind. You know, these makeshift parachutes, and I think I floated for a little bit. Anyway, those were just really simple times. We used to build little cities in the backyard with our little cars and roads and all of that, and then I remember we were inspired by a Bugs Bunny cartoon, and we tried to dig a hutch for ourselves, you know, down into the ground. We didn't get it very deep, but, you know, kind of a hiding fort kind of thing, and then, you know, what we didn't have, we'd build, you know. I mean, my dad gave us a great gift, and he gave us access to the garage, all the hand tools, and kind of over time we got to use power tools, but mostly just hand tools, and we could just build whatever we wanted. I remember I wanted a record player in the worst way, and I remember building a record player out of cardboard. It didn't work, but it was a record player. I wanted a record player, so I built this little record player, you know, and did the little turntable thing and the arm and all out of cardboard, and I glued and taped it together. But anyway, we made all kinds of stuff. We had a little wading pool, and we needed diving boards. We had this big wood box, and we took a plank of plywood and we cantilevered it out, and, you know, we had this diving board for a little wading pool, and anyway, could go on and on about that. But, those are just some memories. I remember, you know, my brother and I getting up very, very early on Saturday mornings, almost before the sun came up. And I remember one Saturday morning, my parents' Sunday school class had a come as you are party, and so they would go to different people's houses and say, you know, we're having a come as you are party at the trails, and you're all invited. So everybody shows up in their pajamas. They show up at they've got their pajamas on. The people that come in to invite us, they have their pajamas on, and I answer the front door, and we're fully dressed. And so we were accused of knowing that they were showing up. I said, no, we're always up early on Saturday, you know, it's just how it is. And so anyway, so they rounded everybody up. Everybody drove to the Trails house. What was his name? It was Kay was her name, and I forgot his name. Anyway, but they lived in a cul-de-sac, and they lived near the Beards, who also went to our church, and the Deaches, who also went to our church, and they lived over kind of west of the Lucky Market off of Euclid and south of Commonwealth. So we went to the Trails house, and they had this big breakfast, and everybody has their robe and pajamas and slippers on, and Ron and I have, you know, we have jeans on, and I think we had denim jackets, or we had some kind of jean jacket on, you know, completely dressed, and looked very out of place. And of course, you know, people kept saying, oh, you guys knew. And I said, no, we didn't know, we're always up early. We always play early on Saturday morning like that. So anyway, but yeah, I mean, we just, I said, if we didn't have it, you know, we made it, and, you know, I like making stuff to this day. I just like constructing things and building things and putting things together, and so And that married well with the profession that I was led to, and just kind of every time you do a specialty detail for a project, it's essentially an invention, because it's a one-off, it's a one-of-a-kind thing, whether it's a bench or a light fixture or it's something that's kind of a one-off, unique to the project. So anyway, it's all by God's providence that all of that came to be. But yeah, temperate climate, and it's nice having this wool blanket around me without the heat. What is it, about 53 degrees in the house or something? So I find it chilly. I don't know what I'd do in a colder climate, but this has been comfortable, and we're thankful for this home out here in Litchfield Park, and it was given to us. We've been here about 3 years now. Yeah. So that's gone fast. So this was fun to remodel. Chris was instrumental in helping with all the remodel stuff, and Steve Besor instrumental, and he did a full-on remodel of this little track house. I never thought I'd live in a stucco box. We'd always lived in older homes in Phoenix, red brick typically, older red brick houses, and so this is a track house, but this is where we are. We have a beautiful view of the mountains. We got a place to walk. There's a park down at the end of the street, and it's convenient. Grocery stores. We have Sprouts. We're close to a lot of things. We're far from church. It's convenient for Chris. He just walks over to Australia Mountain Community College for the time being until he's ready to transfer. But anyways, things come to mind. We'll do round 2 of the memoir. So have a good night.